Dr. Heath Kelsey, who is the program manager for the Integration Application Network, based in he's based over in Cambridge, Maryland, at the Horn Point campus. He got his bachelor's degree from St. Mary's here in southern Maryland, and then went to the University of South Carolina for both a master's and a PhD. And then following that, he joined, he was at the NOAA facility at Oxford as an ecological modeler. And then in 2009, he became a science integrator with the Ian Group, and then the last year became the program manager for Ian. So he's been the lead dog for this Mississippi River Report Card, among other, the Great Barrier Reef as well. So we're going to get this concept, this talk is going to discuss this much more holistic evaluation that we may want to think about regarding Chesapeake Bay future. Okay, over to you, Heath.
Great.
15 minutes starting now.
All right, thanks. Someone tells me he's going to have to get the hook out. Yeah, thanks. This is great to start talking about socioeconomic stuff that you guys brought up earlier, and it's like, wow, this is great, and it's something that we've wrestled with as report card folks, as Bill said, and as you all know, we do a lot of report cards, and mostly ecosystem health based and state of the environment. But there have been a couple projects that we've been involved with that are helping us evolve a little bit towards including more pressure state and response, and one of which you brought up already, the Great Barrier Reef Report Card, and then also the latest one, which we'll end up talking mostly about today, which is kind of taking a step back from starting with an ecosystem health-based report card and looking at broader management goals, and that kind of forces us into a more balanced view of social, economic, and environmental goals and indicators. So I thought I'd talk about assessment frameworks a little bit. This is an assessment framework that we developed along with the folks at Harwell, Gentili and Associates, and at the Hart Research Institute for Gulf Studies. And this is the assessment framework that we proposed for a as yet unfunded Gulf of Mexico report card. We still have hope for it. We're gonna keep going for that. But you can see it's very it allows us to talk about pressure state response. We've added another S here for stressors, but that's not important. But we can cover that whole spectrum of pressure state and management response. And the impact part is where we talk about economy, society, and environment. That's where we bring in those things. So how are these things impacting society and economies? But it's still very centrally an ecosystem health-based assessment. And our report cards traditionally focus on state of the environment. They're ecosystem health based, and they focus on state of the environment very deliberately, but that's where we've been. The best example that you guys are all familiar with is the Chesapeake Bay report card, and this is the 15 reporting regions and track the overall Bay Health Index for since 1986, and very deliberately is an ecosystem health-based report card focusing on state of the environment with these 7 now indicators. But I mentioned that we had a bit of an evolution towards looking at more pressure state and response together. This is the central fold out of the first generation of the Great Barrier Reef report card. So we were able to look at what's happening in the watershed, what's coming out of the rivers and streams into the Gulf Lagoon, or the Reef Lagoon. So the resource that we're managing for is the state of the ecosystem in the Great Barrier Reef ecosystem. And these are the things that are impacting it. So pressures are the nutrients, sediments, and pesticides that are coming into the Gulf Lagoon from the Reef Lagoon from the upland areas watersheds. And we can set pretty aggressive goals. So these are goals that were assessed or implemented by the Queensland State Government and the Queensland government in conjunction with growers and scientists in the region. So 50% reductions in nutrients, pesticides, 20% reductions called for in coke-suspended solids entering the Reef Lagoon. Pretty aggressive. So we can look at the pressure and track that every year. The state, again, is the state of the ecosystem health for the Great Barrier Reef ecosystem. And currently we have seagrass, water quality, and coral as our assessment groups of indicators, and within there we have separate indicators. Abundance for seagrass, it's abundance, reproduction, nutrient status, and light availability. And similarly for water quality and coral, we have indicators that we can wrap up into overall coral water quality and seagrass health. And then management response. The Queensland government and Australian government came together and funded at quite a good expense an initiative or incentives for farmers to adopt better management practices that would conserve more nutrient sediments and pesticides and use less of them. And these C and D practices are the ones that we want to avoid. So they've categorized the types of practices that agricultural industries and growers engage in, and we want to move people off these D and C ones and move them to the A and B ones. The D ones are really unacceptable, overly not conservative at all. The C ones are the bare minimum practices that they should be involved in. B are accepted and very conservative, and A are cutting edge, even experimental practices that they should be looking at. So we want to move these folks from these D and C practices to A and B, and you can see that there's a little bit of variability here. There is some self-reporting issues that we have to deal with. There are some of those, so that's one of the reasons there's a whole lot of B here in the grazing category. That's since been resolved a little bit in future in subsequent issues, but we can track the effectiveness of this program to reduce or to improve management practices on farms, and then look at the effect on loading, and then look at the effect on the ecosystem. So that's the first evolution that we've had that really engages us fully in the pressure state and response model. But it really doesn't get us to that socioeconomic stuff that we've been talking about, and if we start with that fundamental idea that we're looking at an ecosystem health-based assessment, then it's very difficult for us to do. We're kind of adding it on at the end, or looking at ways to incorporate it that might be a little bit forced. But we started working with the Nature Conservancy through the America's Watershed Initiative. It's an initiative spearheaded by the Nature Conservancy, but they don't want to be identified only with them. And they took about a year and a half or 2 years and said, okay, for the Mississippi River, this is a big river system. What is it that we want to manage this system for? It's not just environment, it's not just society, it's not just economy. What should we be managing this river system for? So they went out and they talked to stakeholders at multiple levels, at communities and CEOs of barge companies, etc., and said, what do we need to manage this river system for? And they came up with these 6 broad goals. So if we can manage the river system from top to bottom, the whole basin, for providing clean and adequate water supply, flood risk reduction and control, supporting state, local, and national economies, provide for a clean environment, ample and good recreation opportunities, and then support that really important transportation corridor that it is really important for the nation and really the world economy. If we can manage this river system on a holistic basis and achieve these 6 goals, we're doing pretty good. That's the essence of their idea of integrated river basin management. So they came to us and said, well, how, if we wanted to do a report card, they kind of tracked how we're doing on this. How do we go about developing this assessment? And through our work with report cards that Bill kind of started in Australia, brought back here, and now is going back around the world, we've evolved or developed this 5-step process. So the first step is to develop some kind of conceptual framework. So what are the issues? What are the processes that are affecting each one of these 6 goals? That will allow us to choose the most appropriate indicators for those. And then we define thresholds. How do we measure success? What does success look like for each one of these goal areas? Then we can calculate the scores and then communicate the results as a report card or some kind of science communication product. We want to do that for each one of these broad goal areas. So how do we know what if we're succeeding? How do we know how we're doing in achieving this water supply management goal area for the Mississippi River Basin? And so we've developed a workshop-based approach at a regional level. I'll talk about the regions that we work with in a little bit. But it's a really intense couple of days workshop. So the type of people we have are fairly high up in the food chain. We don't get them for very long, but they are the ones that have the information that we want. We want the guys that are at the regional level and have information and knowledge about the system and expertise in each one of those goal areas. So we want economists, we want water supply experts, we want transportation folks. So we get the CEOs of barge companies in these meetings, and they all sit around the room together and talk about these things. It's really great, but it's very intensive. 5 left. Okay, please. So one of the first things we do is hand them a map. And so we've got all these people sitting around a desk or a table, and we say, okay, rate your watershed. How would you do it? And it's really important because they're sitting around with other folks that are not from the same perspective that they have. And we ask people to take a step back from their area of expertise or their CEO hat. They take that off and think about it as a citizen. So that's important. But it also focuses them on, okay, this is how I feel about the system. This is what I know. And it also means, well, where are the data that supply that? How can I justify that? How can I back up my assertions about the state of this watershed for each one of these 6 goals? So we get them thinking about that. And then we have some breakout sessions and talk about indicators that were most appropriate for that region. And these are the types of things that come out. So water supply, we have designated use, aquifer depletion, and the number of days of water restrictions. Those are the most appropriate ones for that region, which happen to be the lower Mississippi River Basin. We have non-expert and expert opinion. I don't want to get into that, but we like to have the opinions of everyone and like to know how the opinions differ from those folks that are really expert in that area and what everybody else thinks as well. And same with recreation, transportation, and ecosystems. So we have, the only one that's different is the ecosystems one, thanks to Bill. It's got to be different. So we divided that one up into biota, water quality, and habitat. And we have 2 indicators that we're listing as priorities for those. One of the tools we've developed to help us do this, because I mentioned they're really intense workshops and we don't have a lot of time with these folks, is that we've developed an online tool to do a survey ranking system kind of on the fly. So we can be in the room putting together this list of indicators. We come out of our breakout session, we have this list of indicators, we put them up there, and then we say, okay, we talk about them a little bit, everybody in the room, rank them, prioritize them using your phone. Go to this tool, and you can just, if I wanted miles of levee as my top priority, I just go over here and drag it up to the top. You just arrange them in that order. And we really get immediate feedback from everybody. When we're done, we can show them the next slide and say, this is how these things are coming out. We find it's really important because even if someone's indicator, their favorite indicator, isn't at the end of the day, it isn't one of the ones that we've chosen. It doesn't come out as one of the ones that ultimately informs or goes into the report card. We know, and they know, that their input was heard, and that's really important. It's equally as important to get all those people bought into this as it is to pick their brains and get the knowledge out of them. So I mentioned also that we have a regional approach. We would love to be able to do this on a very local approach, local basis, break up these basins into smaller units, but it's just not practical at this stage. We've broken the whole of the basin up into 6 regions. We've recently combined the Arkansas white and the red into one region we're going to do shortly. In September last year, we went to the upper Mississippi, And that, we have these newsletters that come out of our workshops that kind of document progress or kind of breadcrumbs along the trail. So this is what we decided at this workshop. And likewise, we've done the Ohio River Basin in December of 2013. We just recently finished up the Lower Mississippi in Memphis, so we got to go to Graceland. It's very nice. And next month we're going to be going to Tulsa, Oklahoma to talk about these things in the Arkansas White and Red Rivers, and then shortly after that we're going to go up to Rapid City and talk about do the same workshop in Rapid City. After all that's done, we need to have one more meeting in June in Washington, D.C., where we take the results from all of these basins and we wrap them up in a nice little bow. And we say, okay, we're taking all the results. We need to think about this as a whole report card. How do we integrate those results into the overall score? You'll also notice that this is still a state kind of assessment. We need to be thinking about the next generation, which is how do we start looking at the management responses. We've already started talking about that. That's the next phase. And then also the pressures. Can we link those to those pressures? So that's a future generation of this report card process. And I think that's all I've got. I want to thank all of the organizations that we worked with on the report cards we've talked about. If you have any questions, find me at UMCS or find me on the web. Thanks.